Okay, well, I look forward to your comments or connections or questions.
Okay, we have two messengers with microphones, so feel free to raise your hand to begin.
Here's a hand over here. All we need is a microphone.
Oh,
there is a microphone.
Sorry, I was heading to another hand. Sorry,
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, for your sermon on happiness and joy and awe and wonder. I have a question about Jesus' sermon on loving your enemy, because it's something that's been in our minds at the church, at First United Methodist Church of Winter Park. And as Jesus showed us that there are many levels to love, I was wondering, are there many levels to enemies as well?
Well, I certainly think there are. And our enemies are not just other people. As Paul said, the struggle is against powers and principalities, that there are forces. So I think that what we used to call Beelzebub or Lucifer or Satan, we can rename today as racism, sexism, militarism, patriarchy, and other things. I think that we're responsible to translate that. Why do I say these are spirits? Because they keep coming back. You don't kill them. Every generation has to deal anew. We have heroes like Dr. King and others whom we admire, but he did his thing in the 50s and 60s. We got to do our thing in the 21st century, because racism is a spirit. It lives forever, if you will. It lives longer than any of us. And so we have to take it on. We have to develop our hearts of courage, to stand up to fear. And, a lot of violence comes out of fear, like a lot of despair comes out of fear. One of the deep teachings of my life came from Buck Hostorse, a Lakota teacher, who said to me one day, in our tradition, he said, "Fear is a door in the heart that lets evil spirits in." Fear is a door in the heart that lets evil spirits in. So all real prayer, he said, is strengthening our hearts so that fear stays outside the heart. Knocks on the door, but it doesn't penetrate. And it never comes in alone. It comes in with despair. It comes in with projection. A lot of other spirits come dragging in on it. So what I'm saying is that we shouldn't think of enemy as just some person. Think broader, think more cosmically, the powers and principalities. You see, that's where a cosmology and a cosmic Christ theology also gives us a lot more creativity and space within our souls to imagine alternatives. And that's what we want to do for our enemy, especially, if you will, the two-legged enemy. And every two-legged one is caught up in institutions and cultural moments. And that's why I wanted to spend our time today on what's happening in the culture. As I said, the despair and the denial and the pessimism of patriarchy and so forth, this permeates. It's a milieu, very different from the divine milieu. And so it really helps to, of course, try to understand your enemy, what makes this person this way. What was his or her upbringing, etc.? What traumas did they undergo? Blah, blah, blah. So understanding is important. But at the same time, you have to be able to say no. Jesus didn't say that you have to like your enemy. But to love your enemy, I think, is to wish for them what you wish for yourself and others. And that is a healthy planet with healthy societal interactions of justice, not of abuse and control, etc. And so that's how you love your enemy, I think. You embrace them by offering them, too, an alternative. And I think that the nonviolent movement is so profound. And it's very important to realize, that Gandhi got it from Tolstoy. But Gandhi was a Hindu. He wasn't a Christian. And as Father B. Griffith says, Gandhi may be the first Christian on the planet, because he took that Sermon on the Mount and translated it into something that works. Well, it worked for millions of people in India and in America and in South Africa, etc. So the genius of nonviolence is that you love your enemy, but it doesn't mean that you don't resist, you don't go to jail, you don't achieve what you can to turn over the evil that works through our institutions and through other people. So I think a key word there is understanding. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Here's Mike walking down the aisle.
Is it on? Yes. I'm in a theological study group, and the group asked me to ask you if they were going to read a book right now that you have written, what book would you suggest? There's a lot of them out there, and many of them in our group have read your books, but they said, what should we approach right now?
Well, of course, I don't know you and your group personally very well, except that you showed up here. But I love all my children. But the most recent one, I think, frankly, it may be my most radical book, and a short, and scientists love it, is called Naming the Unnameable, 89 Wonderful and Useful Names for God, including the Unnameable God. And I was struck as I was reading Ilya's book, she often brings up this topic about what are our names for God. Meister Eckhart says, all the names we give to God come from an understanding of ourselves. Now, I say this book is radical because it's framed entirely in an Orthodox context. Two people. Thomas Aquinas says, and I quote him at the beginning, he says, every being is a name for God. Every being is a name for God, and no being is a name for God. So that's the apophatic divinity is every being, and the cataphect divinity is every being, and the apophatic is no being. Well, that just opened every being. There's trillions and trillions of names for God. So I picked just 89. But I invite you to create your own too. But listen to those. So in there I have names like flow, which is a very important word today in physics. I was with a 41-year-old physicist last year, and he was giving a talk on synchronicity, which is a big topic of his. And in the middle, there's this one short sentence. He said, God for me is flow. And then he moved on. And that really stuck with me. It's a great word. There's energy. There's, of course, the divine feminine in many versions, the Black Madonna and Tara in so many versions. But I think you can have a lot of fun with that book. And I'll be honest, I think it'll take the top of your head off. And Ilya, I think, is hinting at this in her books. If we can change our rigid naming of a punitive father God, who of course is white, and to other images, things could crack very rapidly. So, and I have to say, scientists went crazy. Rupert Sheldrake, who I've written 2 books with, he wrote me, and he never writes with exclamation points. He's English, after all. He's quite steady. But he had exclamation points all over. He said, I love the book, I love this book. And it's short, too. I think that's part of what he liked about it. It was short. He doesn't like to read theologians for too long. No one does. Anyway, who's healthy. But anyway, that just comes to my mind. But you're a man, you might want to look at this book on the sacred masculine because, we need it. Men need it. Women need it too. Women need it too. Not only because you've got husbands and boyfriends and sons and grandsons and uncles and fathers and brothers and co-workers who are male, but also there is the masculine side to the female soul, which is toxic in our culture too. And that has to be addressed too. So I think that book is really important. I don't think we're going to move as a species if we can't deal with gender balance in the deepest sense. And that includes cleaning up the masculine. We have so many examples of toxic masculinity in high places. It's about time we rattle that cage. What is healthy masculinity? And Can we get there from here? So it's a hard question you asked. Yes. Sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you and the whole Gladdening Light community. And as a Jewish person being in church this morning, I was really expanded by the interfaith quality of talking about Jesus in that way, because growing up as a Jew, you don't ever hear Jesus talked about that way. But I wanted to also remind people that the body is sacred. And when you did the Qigong, or whatever you want to call what you were doing with the body, we're also redeeming the body from what has been a split. And so I just want to say that in Hebrew, the word halakha means to walk. And what we're all doing today is walking our talk. Because when we redeem the body and we redeem our social action and we redeem our justice, we're actually bringing, in your language, Christ down to earth. And I just wanted to thank you for doing this and making it a reality and not just a concept, and embodying your words.
Well, you're welcome. And I'm so glad you spoke to the issue of interfaith, and because this, for me, is one of the great signs of hope in our time. Never before has our species had the banquet of all the world religions as they have evolved to this day there for us to draw from. It's an amazing sign of hope. And the young people, many of them are taking advantage of it for good reason. And, time is running out. The latest UN report says 12 years left to change our direction as a species. We need all the help we can get. This is religion's primary job, spiritual job, to wake us up and to steer us into metanoia, transformation of consciousness. And time's running out, but it can be done. But the fact that we do it together, elbow to elbow, is so important. My most recent book is actually a dialogue with Lama Somo, a Buddhist teacher who's Jewish, North American from Chicago, but she became a serious Tibetan Buddhist. She's fluent in Tibetan a number of years ago. And we did a series of dialogues around the country. And these are now there in a book form, but also the video is available too. But it was just so wonderful for her and for me. And it began because I invited her to teach in my program a course with me on Eckhart and Buddhism. And she couldn't believe what Eckhart had said. She said, this is pure Buddhism. And of course, I found in Buddhism, and still find, a lot of valuable truth and recognition of human nature. And so interfaith is part of the sign of our times. I know when I was with Leonardo Boff 2 years ago in Mexico at a conference, and he spoke for 45 minutes. There were 6,500 people there in person and 92,000 online. And I learned later that the Vatican has 75 people online. I didn't know that was part of it. I'm glad I didn't know. But he spoke about Mother Earth suffering for 45 minutes, and I spoke about the Yellow program, the education of inner city kids. They translated my book on that into Spanish for the occasion. And then we were put on stage together, and there was this big bowl of questions, folded over questions. So we each picked a question, and each of us had 3 minutes to answer it, the same question. After a while, he picked this one question. I'm so glad he picked it, not me. Is the Roman Catholic Church dying in South America? That was the question from Leonardo Boff, former Franciscan and liberation theologian in Brazil. And his answer was yes. It's dying in South America. And then he went on and talked about deep humanism and linking up with other religions, et cetera, et cetera. Then it was my turn to talk. And again, I didn't know the Vatican was tuned in. But I said, it's not just a Roman Catholic problem. Churches are dying all over the place. And I think it's because Gaia is rising. She's asking the new generation to go to work, to do their spiritual work, their inner work, but to travel not with basilicas on our back, with backpacks on our back. We have to make slim our contemplative practices so that we can move easily from contemplation to action and from action to contemplation. And the young people get that like this, and that's why they're dropping out of church like flies. And then I also made a few references to people who walk around in funny hats and golden clothes and red things, and I said, I don't think a lot of people are buying that anymore. And after that, I learned the Vatican was tuned in. Anyway, but I just want to underscore what you said about interfaith, and I think it's beautiful. You made yourself vulnerable to a Celtic and a Christian ritual this morning, and we do this mutually. Mutually. You know, the Dalai Lama says the number one obstacle to interfaith is a bad relationship with one's own faith tradition. That is so insightful. Because dumbed down religion leaves out the cosmos, leaves out the cosmic Christ. It leaves out mysticism. It leaves out the mystics. And so a lot of Christians are walking around absolutely stupid about their own tradition, their own lineage. But getting involved with other traditions, this shakes you up. You say, oh, then you go back and look at your own, often through different eyes. Or sometimes you don't go back. You link up with the other. And that works for some too. But the point is that this is a time we're living in, a mixing. That's postmodernism. One sociologist named Anderson, University of Berkeley, California, he says, in these postmodern times, we all belong to so many communities that we should write ETC period after our names. When I was being hounded by the Vatican, Rabbi Rabbi Zalman Schachtner wrote a letter to the Pope. And it said, why are you attacking this guy? He's trying to do in Christianity what I'm trying to do in Judaism. Well, yeah. But he said, I'll pay my own way to come to Rome to sit down with you and tell you what's really going on, he said. But the fact that we create alliances together is so important, that interfaith is not just about talking religious topics. It's about taking action. It's about shared struggle for compassion and justice. But it begins, as the civil rights movement began, it does begin with the shared spiritual renewal, and it returns to that. Yes. Is there a microphone? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. And one moment, there's one ahead.
All right. I'll just ask my little. This is the fourth time my friends and I have heard you speak. So I'm going to say Matthew, because you're like an old friend to us.
Thank you.
Within the past year, I discovered and have been reading Diarmuid O'Murchu.
Thank you for pronouncing his name. I've always had trouble pronouncing it.
I looked it up. Siri told me how to do that. So, but quantum theology seems to me, every other sentence that I read in that book, I have to stop and think about it and pat my head and bless the man. Because he answers questions that you have that you have answered also many times. I think you're kindred spirits.
Well, yeah, she's saying that she likes this theologian who's Irish, though he's living in Colorado, I believe now, Denver. Pronounce the name again.
Diarmuid O'Murchu.
O'Murchu. He's kept his Celtic name, so it's a little tricky for some of us. But yeah, his books might sell better if he just called himself Joe Blow or something like that. You know? No, but I like his work a lot, and he likes mine. He said a wonderful thing about my book on evil. He said something about how, he said it's a masterpiece. It brings together so many sciences and dimensions, he said. So how could I not like a guy like that, you know? No, but I respect his work very much, and like Elia, he's been doing his homework on the new science, etc. And you know, he's a very good Celtic spirited theologian of our time. Yes. And he's still in his religious order, which is a bit of a miracle.